So we're reviewing our second cluster for the January 2026 Regents Biology exam. So cluster number 2 is questions 6 through 9. It's titled Space Invader. So I'm just going to go over the scoring and give you a few tips about approaching the cluster again. So as always, you want to read the title of the cluster. You want to read all of the material that comes with it, highlight if necessary. We see this is about hydrilla, an aquatic plant, an invasive aquatic plant. So you will have read that, and then you get to the questions. Question number 6 is asking which question would help a student gather information. So it's wants you to select a question here that correctly shows the role of DNA in passing traits from the original hydrilla plant to the offspring that grow when broken off. So when you read that stem of that question, what it's really asking about is asexual reproduction. When a piece of this hydrilla breaks off, then it can grow into an entirely new plant. And so that process is asexual reproduction. So when we look at the choices, what you're going to find in some of these multiple choice questions, there's something wrong with all but one. So if we break down these 4 choices, do the new hydrilla offspring have traits identical to the original because they received half of their DNA from each of the parent plants? That's not correct for asexual reproduction. This isn't sexual reproduction where you have the combining of gametes. This is just a piece of the plant breaking off and growing into a new plant. So there's no mixing of genes, no mixing of traits. So that's what makes number 1 wrong. If we look at number 2, do the offspring have traits identical to the original population because the DNA in the new hydrilla population is the same as the DNA in the broken pieces? Yes, that is correct. The DNA in those broken pieces is exactly the same as the other DNA that are in the other hydrilla cells. That would be a question that would help a student understand the role of DNA. And then if we look at the last 2 choices, do the plants produce new population have different traits from the parent because they have different amounts of DNA? No, that's not correct. They have the same amount of DNA. And do gametes produced have the same DNA as leaf cells? We know in what we learned about sexual reproduction that gametes do not have the same DNA as leaf cells. They have half the number of chromosomes, so different amount of DNA. So the answer to number 6 is 2. Number 7 wants you to complete a model showing inputs and outputs. You have to fill this in completely correctly to get credit. And so this is sun's energy is being used, and so that's clearly showing us photosynthesis. So photosynthesis, the inputs, if you look at the scoring guide, you can see you could either write out in words carbon dioxide and water, or you could use the chemical symbols CO2 and H2O. And then on the right side, the outputs of photosynthesis, we have oxygen, or O2, and then either food or sugar or glucose or the chemical formula C6H12O6. Have to get all those pieces correct. And you only need to choose one, either word or symbol, for the inputs there. And then we scroll down to the end here of the cluster. We have some information. We have 2 graphs showing the growth of hydrilla versus pondweed and the number of branches produced. Again, when you have a graph like this, really look at the axes, look at each line on the graph, and try to understand what these are showing. And then we read the question number 8, which statement provides evidence from the mathematical representation? So the graphs are mathematical representations. So which statement provides evidence? We could say from the graph that the claim that hydrilla is able to efficiently capture resources will have a negative effect on biodiversity of the waterways in which they live. So again, we'll read our choices. And when we do that, what we're going to see is that there are something wrong with these choices except for the correct one. So number 8, hydrilla can produce more branches in 5 weeks than native pondweed, resulting in more oxygen being produced by cellular respiration. That's the part that's wrong, right? That cellular respiration doesn't produce oxygen, it consumes oxygen. So we know that number 1 is incorrect. If you're using process elimination, which I would suggest, you could cross that off. Number 2, hydrilla can double its new growth every week, which uses excessive amounts of nitrogen from the environment for lipid production. That is the part that makes this incorrect. Lipids do not contain nitrogen, so that's wrong. Number 3, hydrilla form longer branches than native pondweed. That is shown by the graphs. So hydrilla forms longer branches than native pondweed, which absorbs sunlight at a faster rate, correct, which reduces a needed resource. So those other plants can't get that sunlight. That would be correct. And then if we look at 4, hydrilla produces 15 times the number of branches as native pondweed. This allows them to consume other plant species faster. Plants don't consume other plants. That makes that incorrect. So what we see is there's something wrong with 1, 2, and 4, and 3 is correct. So 3 is the correct answer. If you chose it, give yourself a +1 there as we keep track of our score. And then finally, the last question in the cluster, human recreational activities such as boating, fishing. You want to read over this introduction. Which solution would best control hydrilla populations in bodies of water and without harming native populations? So if you again look at the choices, use process elimination, recruiting volunteers to remove pondweed. Pondweed's not what we're trying to get rid of. We're trying to get rid of hydrilla, so that makes that incorrect. Apply herbicides. These are chemicals that kill plants that might kill the hydrilla, but also would harm other populations in this body of water. So that's not correct. Apply chemicals that coat the surface while they're blocking light. That would affect many organisms in this ecosystem. So that's not correct. And then 4, requiring boats to be inspected before entering the waterway. That would be one way of controlling hydrilla spread because you would ensure that boats aren't carrying some pieces of hydrilla from one pond or lake to another. So the answer to that is number 4. Give yourself +1 if you got it correct. And that's the end of cluster number 2.